The Illinois General Assembly wrapped up another week at the state capitol, but there was little progress toward working out a new budget agreement for the state of Illinois for the fiscal year that actually started over 2 weeks ago. I'm Jack Titchener. This is Illinois Lawmakers. I'm here with Amanda Vinicky, the State House Bureau Chief for Illinois Public Radio. Lots of noise, lots of activity here in the Capitol this week, but I'd say very little in the way of progress.
It was bustling. You had a lot of incremental movements in regards to the budget, but no full resolution. And in fact, most of the incremental movement was on just a temporary plan, which still you have Republicans, Democrats fighting over. So the Illinois Senate has forwarded on to Governor Bruce Rauner a stopgap measure that would fund what they say are essential services, as well as state employee payroll, for the month of July. They also overrode 5 budget bills that the governor had vetoed. Remember though, Jack, there were 19 budget bills in all. So that means the bulk of the budget vetoes will stand regardless, and we just saw the Senate take that action. The House has 15 days to follow in the Senate's footsteps and make it happen, make that override stand. But we got an indication from House Speaker Michael Madigan that that is not likely.
I was in on that news conference too, and he said, I don't think we're not going to take that path. What path is he taking though?
Who knows? I think that is the golden question. You did see the House begin to take up yet another temporary appropriations bill. So after spending much of Wednesday hearing from social service providers about their woes for the state budget and the problems that it's causing, the House subsequently took up a measure that would fund some of these areas. So for example, autism, a challenge academy for troubled youth, that sort of thing.
Cervical
Maybe we'll
cancer
see more of
screenings.
that. Exactly.
But it didn't take effect because it didn't have 71 votes to take immediate effect.
Talk about incremental movement. It was really like an inch when it needs to move a foot in order to make it reality.
And the speaker also said something that I found to be kind of ominous. He said, I don't presume that the governor and the 4 legislative leaders are going to be the ones to come together with a budget deal.
Yes, and what to make of that? There's been a lot of questions about how often the 4 legislative leaders, so the 2 Democratic leaders of the House and Senate, as well as their Republican counterparts, have actually met with Governor Bruce Rauner. And hearing from many Democrats saying, where is this guy? He was supposed to be the big honcho, the chief executive, and he isn't calling these groups. They haven't met in weeks altogether. That's how budget deals have been brokered in the past. Madigan saying he doesn't think that's going to happen. So how we will get an eventual resolution, he didn't say.
And yet there are some individual meetings that are still going on. President Cullerton in the Senate said that he had just met with the governor a little bit earlier. So you wonder, when is this thing finally going to crack wide open, or how long can it go on? You
do wonder that, and the Senate president had said that he spoke with the governor about property tax relief, and in fact, Democrats said that they came forward with what they thought was a compromise, an intended overture toward the Republican governor, but that did not get through the Senate. There are enough Democrats to have done it, but a few of them voted no, and no Republicans went along with it. They said it didn't go far enough because it didn't include those what unions say are anti-union measures.
And those are things that the governor keeps insisting upon, and the Republican caucuses in both in the House and Senate are still on the same page with him. No apparent cracks in their armor on that. And so those are non-starters with the Democrat side of the aisle.
Exactly. For Democrats, they say it's a fundamental issue that strikes to the very heart of their party's core, and that will send middle-class families lower, that will hurt their wages, even send workers, when it comes to workers' compensation, to the ER or put them on welfare. Republicans say this is the fundamental change that Illinois needs, so you have that big kind of a disagreement, and it hasn't subsided at all.
And one of the things I heard around the building this week was that this one move, like that committee of the whole today, trying to move little pieces of the budget, may be in fact the way that this continues for some time now, trying to move incremental pieces of the budget to see if there's a response on the second floor.
Right. Is it either to get Republicans continually voting no against these needs that a lot of people really believe in, or is it perhaps trying to move little baby budget bills? The governor could sign them. He could say this isn't an out-of-balance budget. Perhaps it's that we're not sure. Maybe that's what Madigan was alluding to when he said that a compromise between the leaders and the governor isn't how this will be resolved.
The House is back next Tuesday. The Senate not scheduled. It's subject to the call of the chair. Amanda Vinicky, thanks very much. Always good to have you on the program.
Thank you, Jack.
Up next on the program, we talk to two of the state Senate's top budget negotiators about what's taking place or not taking place here at the Illinois State House. Joining us now on Illinois Lawmakers, Senate Appropriations 1 Committee Chairwoman Heather Steans of Chicago, a Democrat of Chicago, and Republican Senator Pamela Althoff of McHenry, the Republican spokeswoman on the Senate Revenue Committee. Good to have you both here. Spirited debate this afternoon on the floor of the Senate about the temporary budget that the Senate passed on a party line vote. What was the Democrats' goal in this?
Well, the temporary budget, we'd passed it already. The House amended it to include salaries for all state employees. So we were concurring on that today. So the temporary budget is really focused on getting state employees paid for a month and getting priority issues around people who are really vulnerable, making sure that those things get paid too. Things like taking care of seniors, child care programs, those kinds of programs. And it's just for a month in terms of trying to get to an overall, providing time and space to try to get to an overall budget agreement. So hope that ongoing negotiations can take place to get to a full annual budget agreement.
Senator Althoff, the Republican side of the aisle, not impressed with the effort.
I wouldn't characterize it as not impressed with the effort. I think we all have the same goal. We just would like to go about it in a more comprehensive fashion. We would like to fashion an annual budget, a full budget, so we don't have to continually come back and deal with these issues. So on the temporary side, we too feel that the state employees should be paid. Senator Radonio has a standalone bill that does exactly that, so we certainly support those efforts. It's just the temporary budget, 1 month at a time, we don't support. We would rather deal with the budget in whole, in mass, and come up with a solution that is an end solution and get back to the business of governing.
Senator Steans, the point that was made numerous times on the floor by the Republicans was this is an unconstitutional, unbalanced budget, and if you keep going after this 1 month at a time, pretty soon you're going to have that imbalance of about $4 billion from the $32 billion in revenues you have versus the $36 billion in the budget you passed.
And that's why we very intentionally focus these budgets, the 1 month budgets, very narrowly, so it cannot lead to that situation. It only is funding 13 agencies out of the 100, and even within those agencies, it's less than a 12th of the budget we recommended. So it does not put us on a path that's unsustainable. It rather is trying to buy time and space and protection to make sure state employees get paid and we're taking care of the most vulnerable while we hopefully get to an overall budget agreement. And we've done that historically. You know, the last couple times we didn't have a budget agreement in place, we have passed 1 month temporary budgets.
That was during the Blagojevich and Quinn years.
That was one, and then under Edgar as well, when it was Governor Edgar, 1991.
A point that kept being made also was that the Republicans are willing to keep talking. They want to help you pass a budget. The governor has even said he's for more revenue, but some of those reforms have to be on the table, Senator Althoff.
Absolutely. I think what we're forgetting here is that from a very large margin, actually, an unexpected margin, this governor won the election. I think that that was an absolute message to all of us here that serve in the state of Illinois that what we were doing was unacceptable to the general public. They're not happy. So we do have balanced government now. We have a Republican who's in the executive branch, and we have Democrats who are in control of the General Assembly. I think what the message is what he ran on has not changed. So we're here to look at the full scope of how we make Illinois a better state, how we improve our economy, how we deal with education funding reform, all of those things. And what he's saying is to make this budget work, to sit down and negotiate, we need reforms as well.
But some of those things are diametrically opposed to historic Democratic Party beliefs. When it comes to some of the issues having to do with workers' compensation, term limits, so on and so forth.
And let me also just say, and I'll get into that, I do believe that the governor was clearly elected. And I think the biggest problem the state has is lack of fiscal stability and certainty. And I think that this budget impasse does anything but ameliorate that. It's making it worse. That's what I think that folks in Illinois are really craving first and foremost is fiscal stability, fiscal certainty. We want to understand where we are and that we're on a path of sustainability. I don't think this budget impasse is helping us in any way, shape, or form address those issues. There are some reforms that have been put on the table. I think we've been indicating. We saw President Cullerton move forth on a property tax. bill today, freeze bill, that passed but didn't have the supermajority needed at this point in time to get it passed. But that again has been where he's been working hard on that with Leader Radonio. There's been other efforts going on, I think, as well to have these conversations. But my understanding is the governor continues to put proposals out to the media and hasn't even been pulling the 4 leaders together to have these conversations that he says he cares about. That's not the way to actually govern right now. We really need
Senator Althoff?
I would disagree. We just heard on the floor today that Senator Cullerton met with the governor today. I think there have been many opportunities where all 4 leaders have met to talk about how to move forward. There seems to be an agreement in the Senate side. I will absolutely give President Cullerton all of that accolades for attempting to work with Leader Radonio as well as the governor. We seem to have an impasse in one specific area, and no one is negotiating from that front. And that seems to have stopped any type of negotiation with regard to a budget or with regard to any of the reforms.
Speaker Madigan says those non-budgetary issues are in the extreme. These are not anything to actually do with the budget. Let's deal with the budget, then we can address the others.
I don't think they're in the extreme. Obviously, that would be my perspective. I think they're wise, general reforms that deal directly with the fiscal status of this state. We have to address them. It's part of the whole fiscal atmosphere in Illinois.
One of the things that you did do today, again, it was on a party line vote, was you overrode the governor's vetoes of 5 of the various budget bills that he applied the veto pin to, along with everything in the budget except K through 12 education.
Correct. Again, focused on public safety and issues of Department of Children and Family Services and Aging, where we want to make sure that there's ongoing funding for foster kids who are wards of the state, by definition really our responsibility, and for seniors to ensure that they continue to get services. So again, very narrowly focused, only $2.3 billion out of the $36 billion budget, and in some cases the budgets were below what the governor even introduced. So certainly not, again, on a path that I think provides unsustained funding. I do also just want to mention, though, that some of the reforms that the governor is speaking are extreme. I mean, the thing that he's been wanting to include, for example, with the property tax freeze, is getting rid of collective bargaining. I don't think that's something that the general public supports in Illinois. We saw the governor try to get local governments adopting his turnaround agenda, and they did not go for it. Very few local governments were willing to stand up and support it either. So I do think there's an extreme going on here, and that really has nothing to do with the budget. We've not before ever had a situation when we didn't get to a budget, it was getting held up for non-budgetary.
We got about 30 seconds left. How does collective bargaining end up in a pension bill, getting rid of collective bargaining?
I certainly can't speak for the governor, but I would tell you in response to what I'm hearing from my colleague, who I respect and adore more than I could possibly tell the general public, I think this is an issue where in the past we have definitely held up budget and financial reforms with regard to other issues. It is not uncommon. We do it all the time. We need to look at the whole fiscal condition of this state comprehensively.
Senator Stain, Senator Althoff, thanks very much for joining us. We certainly appreciate your time. Up next on the program, how does the lack of a state budget affect people back home across the state of Illinois? How is the lack of a budget hitting home across the state of Illinois? For that discussion, we turn to Democratic State Representative Elaine Nekritz of Northbrook and Republican State Representative Tim Butler of Springfield. Good to have you both on the program.
Thank you. Thank you, Jay.
You know, we've been hearing of staff layoffs at agencies that serve the safety net programs around the state, that people are being affected there. What's happening in your respective districts? Let's start with you, Representative Nekritz.
The two things I hear most often are from the folks who either provide services funded by the state or receive services funded by the state. So hospitals, those with developmentally disabled family members, those kinds of things. That's who I hear from. And then the other thing I hear is just get it done. You know, find a way to come together and get something done. And that's probably the more common theme that I hear.
Representative Butler?
In the district that I represent with Springfield in this area, we have a lot of state employees. So I hear a lot from people who are really affected by any budget impasse that we may have. These are people whose livelihoods depend upon state government, a lot of state facilities that provide good services locally. So I've heard a lot from folks who are very concerned about getting paychecks, about what the future holds for their jobs and so on. So it's vitally important to our area of the state that we get this done in a collaborative manner and come to some solution quickly.
And here in the Springfield area, I'm sure that a lot of businesses are very dependent on state government as well for their livelihood. You've been through this before in federal government service. You worked for former Congressman Ray LaHood and Congressman Rodney Davis. You've been through, what, three separate shutdowns? What's it like to go through that?
Well, as working for a legislator who was in the middle of the shutdown process, we certainly got a lot of input from constituents about the concerns that they have. I would say it's been different on the state level. I don't think we've seen the impact yet like we saw it on the federal level, where there were shutdowns of national parks and things like that. But obviously, as we move forward, I think we're going to probably see that if we don't come to some budget solution here soon.
You were both in on a hearing earlier this week, the Committee on Government Forecasting and Accountability, which oversees a number of different things, but it's the committee that decides or helps decide what happens if a facility that has over 25 or 50 employees is slated for shutdown. Well, the State Museum just on the corner here from the Capitol complex is up for closing. The place was packed, as I understand it. What did you hear from folks there?
I've been through a fair number of these facility closure hearings with the Commission on Government Forecasting and Accountability, and the place is always packed. What was different to me about this one from other previous facility closure processes was that there was, other than the governor's office, there was no one supporting this. No one said, as a policy matter, we think the Illinois State Museum ought to be closed. And we did hear that with regard to the prisons, with regard to some of the juvenile justice detention centers, and the state-operated developmental centers. So while this one seems to be purely driven by either by either the politics of it or the funding, and it's such a unique facility, I'm not sure that it makes sense to shut this one down.
This is right here in your backyard. This is your hometown. It's kind of the thing that all the grade school kids go to from all across the state, but it's got special meaning for the people of Springfield.
Absolutely. The State Museum's a vital part of our community. I don't support shutting the State Museum down, but I think this is what you've seen the governor's office say, that these are the kind of things that are going to have to happen if we don't come to a budget solution. I really don't want to see the State Museum shut down. It was packed with people. We're approaching the bicentennial in a few years in Illinois, and I think it's important that we look back on our history in Illinois and keep going forward, and the museum does a great job with that.
One figure I heard was there's a $17 million impact on the local Springfield, Sangamon County economy because of the numbers of people that come through, but there are satellite facilities of the museum also, like Lewiston, the Dixon Mounds, the artisan centers in Chicago and around the state, down in my area near Benton.
Yes, I mean, and there would be impacts, as you said, around the state, and I think that those are the kinds of things that we typically get some more detail on from the agency when they are going through a facility closure, and we did not get any detailed study of those kinds of impacts from any of the facilities around the state, which was disappointing to me that the Department of Natural Resources didn't go through that process.
Director Rosenthal says he's hoping that this is only a temporary thing, but there's some concern. Representative Poe, who also represents the Springfield area, is concerned that if people are actually laid off, they may never come back.
I think that's a serious concern. These folks are going to be in demand around the country, maybe not in publicly funded museums, but I'm sure in private museums they might be in demand. So we will lose people if this does close. I think the other thing that's in question is, and it came up in the hearing the other day, is the potential for lawsuits with agreements that we have with folks around the country. So the potential is we could actually be spending more money defending the state in lawsuits than we're actually saving and closing the museum.
And that would be something that's been loaned to the museum for public display or donated for public display, and
correct.
You can't see
agreements they have with federal agencies, things like that.
There's also other impacts. You mentioned hospitals a little earlier, Representative Nekritz. What happens to the Medicaid payments in this whole thing?
Well, some of that is the subject of some of the lawsuits that have been going on, and I believe that one of the courts ruled recently that the state could continue to make Medicaid payments at the same rate that they were at same rates that they were paying in the last fiscal year. So the impact may not be as significant there, but I still think that that it has to raise concern, because if you're simply relying on a court case and the money isn't there to back it up, we obviously can't pay those bills.
A number of the human service safety net agencies around the state are already starting to furlough people, are already starting to lay off people. I just saw this week where the Easter Seals area agency here in the central Illinois area has laid off 40 people, or putting them on furlough. And that means, by extension, that hundreds of families will lose access to those services.
I think this underscores, with our discussion previously about the museum, about human services programs, the need why we need to have serious reform. We don't have enough money in Illinois to fund many of these programs without a revenue increase, as we know. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the big question here. These are important programs. I've yet to have someone walk in my door and say, hey, cut my program. Everyone has a worthy cause, but we need to figure out as legislators what our priorities are. Medicaid has expanded greatly over the last decade or so. But, are there avenues that we can look at reforms and reductions to make sure that we live within our means?
Well, one of the areas, a number of those areas have to do with the governor's turnaround agenda, and that's everything from workers' compensation rates to a new pension proposal that he laid out last week. And, of course, Representative Nekrich, you're in charge of the Pensions Committee. You're having a hearing on that later today. That's a 500-page bill, and there's everything in there from collective bargaining rights to city bankruptcies.
Mm-hmm. It's a wide-ranging proposal, and I'm not sure it meets the constitutional requirement that we address one subject in each piece of legislation. But I also think, given that the Supreme Court's decision on the pension case back in late April, early May, I'm not sure how the governor's people could argue that their proposal meets the standards set forth in that court case. So we're looking forward to having that discussion with them to figure out why this one is constitutional versus the one that was struck down.
Representative Butler, you've seen gridlock firsthand on Capitol Hill. How does this equate to what you're seeing here? First person in Springfield, you have a deeply entrenched governor who believes that he has right to believe that he was elected on a reform agenda to get some things done, to get people back to work. Where Speaker Madigan, on the other hand, says, well, these are core values of the Democratic Party. We can't violate those.
I think we have to work in a collaborative manner. I think if you locked Elaine and I in a room together, we could probably hammer it out pretty quick. There's a lot of feeling out that's still going on here between the Speaker and the Governor and the President. And, my hope is we're going to see something here fairly soon. I know there's talks going on behind the scenes on the staff level. I think once the Governor and the Speaker sit down and get serious about trying to figure out a compromise, I think it could happen pretty quickly.
Representative Nekrich? What do you think?
I totally agree. And I think especially if my view is that the citizens of the state of Illinois sent divided government to Springfield to fix the state's fiscal crisis. And I think that we can do that, and it wouldn't take all that, it wouldn't be all that hard. We had a week together, we could make it happen. So if we can focus on that and then address some of the other items, I think we could absolutely be moving ahead fairly quickly.
Representative Nekrich, Representative Butler, thanks very much. We appreciate your time on Illinois Lawmakers. That's it for this week's special coverage of the summer session of the Illinois General Assembly. We'll be back at the Illinois Capitol when lawmakers return. From all of us at Springfield, thanks very much for watching.